After an unfortunate car accident, Jacob wakes up as Kyle in the world of MHA, someone who wasn't even an extra in the story, in a world where superpowered humans ruled and those without quirks were seen as lesser. Kyle awakens something else. It was not a quirk, it was something greater, an ancestral vampire bloodline. A talent so great that he could fold superhumans with ease, steal quirks and freeze people with as little as a glance. With this new power, Kyle chooses to defy the plot. In this world, he will be neither the hero nor the villain. No, he will be the force that defies them both. Hello, everyone. Omni-sensei here with What If I Was Reborn in MHA with Vampire Bloodline. If you enjoy this content, please smash the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to check out the original story linked in the description. I hope you enjoy listening to it.
It was a cold night. Well, every night was cold in one way or another. It was either the chill of the winter wind, or the chill of a dagger as it slipped its way into your chest. The laughter of the villain that plunged it 6 inches deep, and the thump of your body as it fell to the floor. But today, the chill was different. This time, it was even more terrifying. Today was a day no one would have ever imagined happening, an impossibility to both heroes and villains. Nijire Hado was soaring through the sky, observing the procession from a safe distance. The teachers had all warned her to stay away from conflict. They, the big three of UA, were asked to step aside for today. That was just how dangerous this man was and how poisonous his philosophy could be. Boom! An invisible shockwave cut through the area, unsettling Nijire, who was still in the air. Dust billowed in all directions like a thick cloud and thousands of windows shattered. The city had been turned into a war zone. Net-like cracks filled the roads, buildings were on fire, and the earth was trembling just from the sheer amount of quirks being used. Heroes, villains, and even neutrals had all gathered to unleash hell, but not against themselves. They were here to take out a single man. All Might flew out of the thicket, his body barely holding up as he ascended into the sky. His gaze darkened, locked on the ground below. How is this even possible? How can only he take on all our heroes and even the villains? He drew his hand backward and the wind began to condense around him. His muscles tightened, now a sharp whistling sound filled the air. Down below, the cloud of dust settled and Nijire finally got a proper glance at the Mun. In the madness, he stood unfazed, taking everything the heroes had to offer and giving them more as payment. Just who is that guy? An unregistered quirk, an unknown face. No one had ever seen how he looked, just his mask, an ornate domino mask made out of solid gold and obsidian. But today, maybe today they would win. You can do it, All Might, she screamed at the top of her voice. And then All Might lunged, ripping through the air like a rocket, moving so fast that the wind howled like a leviathan, and the earth shook as though it was afraid to take his blow. United States of Smash. Bang. The earth caved, wind rushed past them like a tempest, and several cars were blown away from the impact. Yes. Nijire flew down at max speed, a wide smile on her face. He got him. But just as she neared the scene of the crash, her breath caught in her throat, and her fingers began to tremble. He was there. Standing in a crater as though he had been hit by a 2-year-old, the man stood and, worst of all, he had a smile on his face. All Might was nowhere to be found. All around them countless villains and heroes were lying helpless. How is he still standing? She had to do something. Nijire had to save them. Do something, Nijire. She screamed to herself, but her body would not move. As the Mun dusted his clothes and slowly, he turned to face her, those red eyes piercing into her soul. His laughter came a second later, his voice sounding youthful but strangely pleasant. He took a step forward and then another step. He was walking towards her and still she could not move. The fear had locked her feet in place. Now, what do we have here? Nijire. How does he know my name? He lifted his head slightly as though he was sniffing the air. Wow, how exquisite. The strange man pushed her hair behind her ears and smiled. Don't worry, this is only going to sting a little bit. He opened his mouth, revealing fangs no human should have, and his hands gripped her with a strength greater than she had ever felt. His red eyes seemed to glow even brighter as he inched closer, each second bringing her to her unfortunate end. Red eyes. Kyle stood in front of his bathroom mirror, a shocked look on his face. Right in front of him was a face he could not remember, tousled black hair, wary red eyes and a lean figure. Where am I? And how the hell did I get here? Panic began to slowly creep into his heart. Little by little it threatened the bed to consume him. It was like being stuck inside a foreign vessel. Calm down, Kyle. Think. What happened? His memories came in flashes, glowing red lights, a speeding car, bang. And a body in the air. Oh, I died. Run over by a police car, how ironic. The police were too busy playing hero to focus on the road, and now they had cost him his life. Did I reincarnate? Kyle glanced at the room. It was strangely tidy, too tidy. It was as though no one had used the room in ages. There were dust mites everywhere, the desk was neatly organized and the light was off. Wait, off? How can I see? A chill went down his spine the moment he realized this. To him the room was as clear as day, yet from the glow of the moon outside his window, Kyle could tell that it was night. That was when a light, serene ring cut through the empty room, reverberating over the walls. Ding. System initializing. System initialized. Ding. Initiating talent gotcha. Initiating character gotcha. What is this? Darkness suddenly clouded Kyle's vision, and then dark colors swirled before him. Before he knew it, he had stumbled to the floor, his breath shaky and sweat dripping down his face. His heart, it was beating way too fast. It was so loud that the sound of its beating blotted out every other sound. Kyle placed his hands on his chest to calm himself, but it was doing little to nothing. Seconds later, a tingling feeling began to spread through his fingers. What the hell is happening? He took raspy breaths, trying to calm his heart, yet it was like blowing on a fire to put it out. It only made it worse. His hands gripped the floor like a lifeline as Kyle suppressed a scream, and then the room shifted. Traditional Japanese walls gave way to a vast expanse of darkness accompanied by a cold that could chill the soul. But at the same time, Kyle had realized what was going on. How could an otaku like him not know? The pain in his chest had subsided and he could finally move, so he rose up and stared into the darkness. I have been transmigrated, haven't I? Transmigration novels always had this cliché opening. He could tell just from the signs. A light hum spread through the darkness as though to confirm his statement. What world was I transmigrated into? Whose body is this? He wondered, his mind already racing. Wait, that's not what is important now. Where is my cheat skill? Where is the damn gotcha? Whoosh. A colossal ball of light tore through the ground with the energy of a nuclear bomb. If Kyle's body was not non-existent in this plane, then he would have been completely incinerated. The large star tore through the ground with a terrible boom, brightening up the entire world. Now Kyle could see the artistic clouds that covered the sky and the endless plain of nothingness that surrounded him. His gaze was locked on the shooting star. Multiple smaller stars flew around it, curving around the bigger star. It was far too familiar. Genshin. It was just like the pull animation of a popular game he had played in the past. Give me Mavuka. No, Skirk. Anything for that cold beauty. The world grumbled as though mocking his greed, but Kyle kept his eyes clasped, praying in his mind that he would not get a dud. The shooting star swirled in the air and then changed trajectory, speeding right towards him. Bang! Smoke covered the entire area as a figure began to rise from the fog. Kyle could not see them properly, but she seemed the right height. When he saw a strand of white hair, his heart melted with joy, but in the next second his heart dropped. Please no. Anyone but him, I'll even take Chi-Chi. The Mun dusted the smoke off his body and walked towards Kyle. That was a rocky landing, wouldn't you agree? Sino. Of all people, he got the most annoying of them all. The general smiled and tried to face the sky. I've been sent here from Teyvat to assist you in this world. Let's try to get along, shall we? Kyle kept looking forward. Hey, I'm talking to you. What? He placed an arm over Kyle's shoulders. Are you feeling a little SCNDI mental right now? Kyle felt his soul leaving his body. Talent gotcha please. Once again the world trembled. The sky was brightened with a powerful beam of light and then a shooting star began to emerge. Gold. Please gold. He had already gotten a terrible character pull. A bad talent would send him to an early grave. The star emerged with an earth-shaking force, a bright gold that was so brilliant Kyle felt it brighten up his soul with joy. The star soared up into the air, cutting into the sky with breathtaking speed. But then, the unexpected happened. The bright golden gleam transformed into a dark red. Lightning pulsed across the star as the world was bathed in a crimson glow. Red. There were only blue, purple, and gold in Genshin. If this gacha system was similar, then there was no red. Another dud. The star curved in the air and raced towards him, an entire ball of destruction, causing Kyle to gulp. Somehow, he felt like this was going to be painful, very painful. Meanwhile, Sino whistled. That can't be good. Boom. Kyle blinked and he was back in his room. His hands were shaking and his mind was foggy, but he was not dead, at least not yet. Then a searing pain cut through his chest. It felt as though someone had driven a dagger right through his heart. Kyle groaned in pain and clutched his shirt as he suddenly felt very weak. He stumbled to the side of the room, crashing into the table. Books and several other things came tumbling down as he held the table for support. But his fingers were too weak to properly grip the wood. I really did get a dud, didn't I? He breathed out. I can't die, I won't die. His voice was little more than a whisper now. Then a terrible cold overtook him. Kyle began to feel his pulse slow, his heart moving to a crawl. Ba-dump. 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 Soon, it was impossible to feel his pulse, and then his body became as cold as a corpse. What the hell is T? He fell to the floor, feeling his heart getting even slower, up until the point that it stopped. Kyle let out his final breath as his heartbeat ceased. And then, ba-dump, ba-dump, ba-dump. Aiya. Kyle suddenly sat up straight, his eyes wide in fear. He felt his body, his face, his chest, and his arms. I'm alive? What the hell was that? Ding. Congratulations, host. Talent awakening complete. Ancestral vampire bloodline. Kyle stared at the glowing text in front of him. Ancestral vampire bloodline. So I am a bloodsucker, the hell. He wasn't sure if he should be happy or sad. On one hand, vampire sounded cool, but ancestral vampire sounded way cooler. There was just one problem. Drinking blood was not his thing. It isn't anyone's thing. Kyle flinched. You can talk, well, not talk, but you know what I mean. The system did not reply, it just remained silent. Why aren't you saying anything? He asked the system, but to anyone watching, it looked as though he was speaking to an empty room. He let out a sigh. How do I even know my stats? What sort of useless system is this? Hey, I'm not useless, you punk. This time it was not a floating screen in front of him, nor a voice in his head. Instead, it was a voice from beside him, and it was close. Far too close. Slowly, Kyle tilted his head to the left. Whoa. He jumped to the side of the room, hurrying to shove off the creature that had appeared on his shoulder. As a result, he crashed into his dresser, sending the whole thing collapsing down. Now at the edge of the wall, he quickly grabbed the first thing that came to his hand, a heavy bottle of lotion. He cradled it in his hands and waved it threateningly at the figure in front of him. A rat? How did a rat get into the room? Hey, mind your manners, I am no rat. I'm a mouse. It said in a feminine voice. What's the difference? You are both garbage swimmers. The mouse's shoulders slumped slightly. The little vermin seemed genuinely offended. Maybe I went too far. On closer observation, Kyle realized that this was no ordinary mouse, rather. It looked just like a regular mouse, except for the fact that it was light pink in color, slightly transparent, and glowing. Wait, how did I not notice this at first? The mouse was staring at the ground now, as though it was expecting some sort of apology. There was no chance in hell he was apologizing to a rat though. Kyle got up and dusted his clothes, keeping a respectable distance between himself and the mouse. That was when he noticed yet another thing. Where is Sino? He asked out loud. He had been with him in the other world, so why was he not here? If he were here, he would easily get rid of the little rodent in his room. Sino is a summon. You can summon him at any time using your system, the mouse muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Kyle glanced down at it and raised a brow. And how do you know? What sort of strange world did I get transmigrated into that mice can talk? The mouse glanced up at him, giving him a deadpan look. You can't be serious. Kyle's eyes narrowed. A few seconds passed. That was when he remembered an old book he read, a book where the system could manifest itself as a hot lady. Don't tell me I got a damn rat. Mouse. I am a mouse, you dunce. The mouse hopped into the air like a rabid animal and reached for his neck with its tiny arms, but before it could grab him, Kyle darted to the side and it whistled past him. I'm sorry, okay? He said, his hands raised defensively. Even if he had drawn the short end of the stick, offending his system was always a terrible thing to do. He didn't know what was waiting for him outside these walls. If it withdrew its help, then he might just die in the first few seconds. What is your name? The system glared at him. Its fur was already spiky from anger, but after a few seconds it relaxed and the mouse sighed. Mind you, she was standing on 2 legs. Daisy. Nice to meet you, Daisy. Once again, forgive my foolishness. Kyle smiled, hoping the little mouse would forgive him. After staring at him a second later, the mouse sighed, sat down, and pouted. Only because you begged. Kyle smiled, and then suddenly a new screen appeared in front of him. Name, Kyle Roswell. Title, Blood Rat. Class, Ancestral Vampire. Skills, Drain, After Dark, Passive, Blood Manipulation, Bloodlust, Primordial Terror, Summons, Sino, General Mahamatra, Level 0, Quests, nil. Strength, 50. Agility, 45. Perception, 25. Energy, 20. Defense, 17. Defense against wood, -50. Hunger level, low. Kyle glanced at the screen and turned to Daisy. Blood rat, really? The mouse smirked. I don't make the rules. Breathing out an annoyed sigh, his eyes moved down to the next tab. There were a ton of skills outlined there, but he had no idea what they meant. How do I know what these mean? The mouse snapped her fingers and a string of text appeared before him. Drain when drinking the blood of an awakened individual. The host has the ability to extract their abilities and add them to his skills. This is actually OP. To survive as a vampire, he already had to drink blood. To be able to gain abilities from doing so was just out of this world. That meant his skills would only continue to increase. He glanced at the next skill and a small smile appeared on his face. After Dark, Passive, during nighttime, the host gains a 50% buff to all skills and stats. Pretty standard for a vampire. Blood Manipulation. The host can manipulate their blood to a high degree. Spilled blood of others can also be manipulated, but to a lesser degree. Bloodlust. The host has a maddening drive for blood. When this craving is satisfied, he will gain a 50% all-round boost. Not bad, but the first part is more of a debuff. If he was to combine Bloodlust with After Dark, then he could perform at 2 times his usual capacity. Finally, he glanced at the last tab. Primordial Terror. The host can unleash a terror ability. Those exposed to your aura will feel a crippling amount of fear that may paralyze or even kill them based on their underlying health conditions. When an individual is affected by Primordial Terror, all physical incoming damage is reduced by 20%. A wide smile tugged at the corner of his lips as he finally read the last word. Fantastic, this is absolutely broken. Humph. Daisy let out a proud grunt from where she stood. Kyle turned and looked back at the screen, then frowned. Defense against wood, 50. What sort of weakness is that? Daisy shrugged. You're a vampire. What did you expect? It was a very concerning weakness, but for it to work, they would have to somehow stab him with it first. If he planned his activities well, before someone strong enough to do that would arrive, he would have already been too strong for it to matter. He mentally closed the tab and once again glanced at the room. What should I do first? Kyle still had no idea where he was or what he had transmigrated into. I guess I should check out the city first. As he began walking toward the door, he heard a disappointed sigh from behind him. What is it? He turned. Daisy had left the dresser and was now standing on the windowsill. Where do you think you're going? He raised a brow. I'm going to check out the city. Silence followed. The little mouse ran a hand over her face and then stared blankly at him. If you're going to explore the city, then won't it be best if you had an aerial view? Kyle's mouth hung open when he realized what she was getting at. Don't tell me, can I really do it? Daisy smiled smugly and sparks surged through his body. Since childhood, it had been the dream of any sane person to fly, and he was no exception. He took the first step and then dashed toward the window, but what was meant to be a simple run suddenly transformed into something else. The world blurred around him, the wind whistling past his ear. Within a fraction of a second, Kyle found himself in front of the window. His eyes widened. Vampire speed. Daisy nodded and then jumped atop his shoulder, grabbing onto his collar. Wasting no time, Kyle pulled the window open, allowing the cold night wind to blow into the room. He took in a deep breath, enjoying the refreshing breeze, and stared down. They were nearly 20 stories high, an apartment complex in the center of a bustling city. Lights shone everywhere in the landscape like twinkling stars. A vast array of colors blending together to make the night seem even more magical. Kyle stared down, watching the world below him with a smile. And then he jumped. The wind washed over his body as he descended, cutting through the air like a meteor. But he did not use his vampire skill. Not yet. The ground was swiftly approaching, the distant pavement getting closer and closer. There were a few people on the street, but they had not noticed him yet. Kyle? Daisy called out to him, her voice sounding slightly panicked. Not yet. His voice was calm but filled with excitement. If I'm going to do it. He was now just a few feet away from shattering, turning into a bloody mush on the floor. Then I have to do it right. Whoosh. Before his body could even graze the floor, he suddenly flew, speeding past a nearby woman like a ballistic missile. The wind rushed past, gathering dust and nearly flinging the woman's skirt into the air. The city washed past him like a mirage. Multiple lights and sights moved past his vision far too fast. His clothes felt light, the wind exploring every aspect of his body like a desperate lover. It felt good. He ascended, going higher and higher until he could touch the clouds, and then he lifted his hands at his sides and screamed at the top of his voice. I feel alive. To think that he would be reborn into a world like this. He stared back at the city, his smile broadening. During his flight, he had picked up a lot of details. From signboards to street decorations. Everything had been enough to make him come to a conclusion. This was the world of My Hero Academia. Not bad. With this power, maybe I can just change the ending. What do you think, Daisy? There were many things he had to change. First, he had to help Dekubag Achiko. Then he would have to do something about Shigaraki. As a reader, he had seen every perspective. He knew who the real bad guys were and those who had been thrown into evil due to their circumstances. He would change their fates, one hero/villain at a time. Daisy, who had crawled underneath his shirt when he began flying too fast, stuck her head out, her face looking tired. Can we go down now? I hate heights. Sure, no prob, badump. Kyle clutched onto his shirt, his eyes wide as pain seared through his chest. Warning. Your body is under stress from not having awakened. Awakened? What the hell is blurg? He suddenly gagged, the world turning blurry in his vision, and then he fell, right out of the sky. As he descended, Daisy began frantically slapping his collarbone, but it was to no effect. No matter what she did, he would not wake up, and very soon, they would crash. Wake up, Kyle. With nothing left to do, she panicked and sank her teeth right into his collarbone, grinding her fangs over the flesh. It was as though electricity had been passed through his body. Kyle's eyes shot open and he suddenly slowed his descent, managing to crash into a nearby dumpster. Ouch, what the hell was that? Daisy had hopped off him and was hugging the ground as though it was her best friend. Then a screen suddenly flashed in front of his face. Your bloodline is unstable. To stabilize your bloodline, you must complete the following tasks. Step 1. Drink a glass of water. Your bloodline is unstable. To stabilize your bloodline, you must complete the following tasks. Step 1. Drink a glass of water. Kyle was still feeling out of it. There was a slight ringing in his ears, like sirens that had been tuned down. His legs were wonky and standing was a pain, but he still managed to read the words. "Really, is it that easy?" he blurted out, turning to Daisy. The mouse stood up and dusted her little round belly. "Just do as the system says." A pang of pain suddenly surged in his belly, and he quickly hurried out of the alley he was in. "Water, where can you get water?" His desperation was slowly beginning to creep into his voice, his stomach tightening in pain. His eyes roamed over the street looking for anything that remotely resembled water when he noticed a vending machine on the other side of the street. Staggering forward like a drunkard, Kyle all but leaped towards his salvation. He didn't even pay attention to the road before he ran into it. Blaring light flashed in his vision as a car came to a stop just in front of him, the driver hurling insults his way. Kyle did not bother replying. His stomach felt on fire. It was as though any second now his belly would burst. He was so confused that he even forgot to use his vampire speed. He arrived at the vending machine shortly after. Right in front of him, just a few inches away from his face, was a bottle of water. He gulped and reached for it. Tap. His fingers met glass, and for a second he was genuinely confused. He tapped the glass again, like a wild animal trying to figure out what sorcery was going on. Then he froze. "What the hell am I doing?" Kyle ran his hands over his face. "If I can't control this, how will I manage when the bloodlust comes?" He mentally reprimanded himself and sighed to calm his racing heart. "Money, that's what I need right now." He reached into his pocket, hoping that maybe whoever this was, he had something in his pockets, only to be disappointed. Not only were the pockets empty, but they also had holes. "Where can I get money right now?" He needed water badly, so badly that his thirst threatened to make him mad. "You want something to drink?" Came a light voice from beside him. Kyle turned in the direction of the voice and his breath caught in his throat. Standing beside him was a beauty beyond comparison. She was not too tall, just about the height of his shoulders. Her eyes were golden like the morning sun, and her pale blonde hair cascaded down her shoulders like a flowing river. For a second they both stared at each other in silence, neither person saying a word. "Himiko?" Immediately after those words left his mouth, Kyle regretted them. Because he had watched the anime, he knew exactly who she was, but that was information he was not meant to know. Not to mention that Himiko was a villain. There was no telling how she would react to a random stranger knowing her identity. But damn. It's her fault for catching me off guard like this. The anime almost always showed the side characters in their villain/hero gear. It was either that or they were repeating the same thing for weeks. But this time Toga was dressed in a completely different way. Her hair that was often tied up was left to freely flow down, and instead of her regular outfit, she was in a simple white dress that hung just over her mid-thigh. Damn it, I'm still staring. Kyle looked away, blushing from embarrassment. "Sorry about that, you surprised me," he managed to say before looking back at the vending machine. Himiko watched him sometimes. Just as he had been, she as well was transfixed on one thing about the stranger. She was so lost in thought that she didn't even get what he said, and it was all because of his teeth. They were just like hers. Sharp canines that outgrew the rest of her teeth. One feature that had made people call her abnormal in the past. Is he like me? She wondered, a faint glimmer of hope rising in her heart. But at the same time, unpleasant memories flashed in her mind, memories that she would rather forget. She shook her head slowly. "It's impossible." "Do you want something to drink?" she asked once more, repeating her earlier question. "Yes, but I seem to have forgotten my wallet." Kyle replied, scratching his head. It was a lie, but a necessary one. To his surprise, Himiko pulled out a bill and slid it into the machine. There was a light popping sound as the two drinks rolled down the vending machine. She placed her hand into it and pulled it out. One bottle of water and a can of iced coffee. After staring at the bottle for a moment, Himiko handed it to Kyle. He did not immediately take the bottle. Instead, he started looking from the bottle to her face. Himiko, a notorious villain. Is she really buying me a drink? What? You don't want it? She was about to pull back when Kyle hurriedly took the bottle, his hand lightly grazing hers. Thank you. No problem. Just pay me the next time we meet. She turned around and began walking away, leaving Kyle staring at her disappearing form. Only when she had gone did his stomach clench, the pain coming upon him like a raging beast. He quickly twisted off the cap and greedily drank from the bottle, not even breathing as he gulped down the liquid. The water slid down his throat, igniting his nerves with its refreshing touch, and his stomach grumbled lightly, accepting the water with joy. The relief was instant. It was like the feeling of submerging in a pool during a hot summer weekend. Congratulations. Mission complete. You have obtained 5 stats to energy as a reward. Energy, 20 plus 5, new quest. Quest details, drink blood, duration, 2 hours. Rewards, 10 points to perception. Failure, death. What? The doors to a lively pub swung open and 3 women stepped out of the building, holding onto each other to keep themselves from falling. Their giggles filled the air as they laughed with drunken mirth. "You're crazy, Sakura. I didn't think you would finish the whole bottle," said one of the girls, laughing heartily. Sakura raised her head to meet her gaze. Her eyes felt heavy and her head light. "Why, you were the one," she paused, realizing that she had been speaking to the lamp post this whole time. Sakura slowly turned to her friends, who were barely restraining their laughter. "You were the one who dared me," she said, her voice slurring. "I didn't think you would do it though," the third woman said, managing to sound a little coherent. "Well, we should get going. We all have class tomorrow. The professor can be quite a headache." The girls waved themselves goodbye and began their trek home, all 3 of them leaving in opposite directions. As Sakura walked home, the world around her was a blur of colors. At times she would nearly fall asleep while walking. Other times she would bump into strangers who would glare at her immediately after they perceived the strong scent of alcohol. They don't understand. Even without the dare, she would have still drunk as much as she did that night. Drinking was the only way she could survive her difficult life. When she drank just the right amount, she could have fun, live as though she were a normal girl, and forget everything going on around her. She was in a huge amount of debt, money she had borrowed to pay her sick mother's hospital bills. Yet, even after paying so much, she still hadn't covered the entire bill. So she got a job, but since she was still in college, the pay was minimal. As if that wasn't bad enough, her boss was a menace. "That bastard," she cursed, kicking a can to the other side of the street. Not only did he make her work overtime, but he was abusive and would lash out at them due to the slightest provocation. Thankfully, he had not been at work for a few weeks now. But his vacation was bound to end soon and the torment would continue. With a lot of thoughts running through her mind, Sakura did not realize when she walked into a lonely part of town. She paused in front of a dark alley and looked around. "Where am?" Cold hands suddenly reached for her from the shadows, one hand covering her mouth and the other wrapped around her waist. She was pulled into the darkness, unable to scream and too weak to even struggle. "Drink blood." The weird part of being a vampire was finally staring Kyle in the face, and although he expected it to happen sometime soon, he was still unprepared. The thought of drinking blood sounded disgusting, yet the more time he wasted thinking about it, the more his stomach growled, his body demanding to be sated. It didn't help that Daisy had vanished, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He ran to the calmest part of town and huddled in a corner, considering his next move and trying to fight his urges. That was when he heard it. Faint footsteps getting closer by the second. His senses were heightened so he could hear the light crunches, the rustle of air as it left her nostrils, and her heart, it sounded in his ears like a sweet, inviting melody. The next few seconds were a blur. The blur of the environment, the slight sound of a stifle, a warm body pressed against him, then darkness. When he came to, there was a girl in front of him, her eyes wide in fear as she stared into his red eyes. Kyle tried to stop himself, but her heart. My God. It was just too tempting. He sank his fangs into her neck a second later, and the moment the blood hit his tongue, something changed. Her blood was smoother than honey and tasted far sweeter. It was invigorating, maddening even. When the scent of her blood reached his nose, it was as though electricity was let loose in his veins. He drank greedily, his body craving more of her delicious blood. It was only when she fell in his arms that he realized he had gone too far. He jumped back, his fingers on his lips, and the girl crumpled to the ground like a broken doll. No, what have I done? Did I kill her? Congratulations. Kyle immediately waved off the notification. This was not the time. He fell to his knees, his eyes wide in terror. How could he have killed someone already? This was the first day of his transmigration. The body. I have to do something about the body. There was always a hero on patrol. He had not been caught yet, but there was a chance he would be soon. Ah shit. I sound like a serial killer now. Should I turn myself in? It was the right thing to do, but after thinking about it for some time, Kyle shook his head. He couldn't bring himself to do it. While tumultuous thoughts raced in his mind, Kyle heard something that made his face brighten up. A heartbeat. It was far weaker than normal, but it was there. His body blurred and he appeared in front of her in a fraction of a second. Gently, as though he was picking up a fragile piece of glass, Kyle lifted her in a princess carry. Hang in there, I won't let you die. He had to get to a hospital as quickly as possible, but he needed to avoid any hero that might be on patrol. If he were caught, then all his plans for this world would crumble to ash. There was only one way to get her safely to the hospital as well as go undetected. A figure cut through the clouds, moving so fast that the wind reverberated around her body, sending her hair in a spiral. From her height in the air, she could see the entirety of the city, her red eyes moving from street to street. Slowly, her body began to descend, but just as her feet touched the roof of a building, she propelled herself forward once more, cutting through the sky like a bullet. That was when she heard something, faint breathing and a slowly beating heart. Mako landed on another building, but this time she did not dash forward. Instead, she closed her eyes and listened, trying to locate the sound. There. She turned, catching a glimpse of a figure in the distance. It was dark and they were too far for her to properly see them, but she could tell that it was two people. A man carrying a girl in his arms. Is he a hero saving her? Her eyes narrowed. Or a villain? What the hell did you do to her? She cursed, tightening the muscles of her legs. She raised her hands, bending forward slightly, and launched herself forward. Boom. Concrete shattered and a small shock wave cut through the area as her body ascended. I've got you now. She was mere seconds away from getting a glimpse of the Mun when a dark figure suddenly appeared in front of her. Something blunt slammed into her gut, the pain coursing through her abdomen as she was launched back like a baseball. She flipped midair and landed on a nearby roof, her feet and hands digging deep into the concrete. Then she looked up. Now who the hell are you? Among both heroes and villains, he was an unfamiliar face, and oddly dressed at that. Worst of all, his features resembled hers. He had long, stark white hair that fell past his shoulders, and a hat above it that resembled a jackal's head, a tribute to Anubis, no doubt. His crimson eyes bored into hers as he held up his polearm and took slow steps towards her. Mako let out a dry laugh. He's strong. She could feel it just by standing close to him. Then she got up and said, I don't like your style. The Mun did not say anything at first. It was as though he had something running through his mind. His face brightened up a second later. I was really hoping we wouldn't have to fight, he said with a straight face. Ha. It took her a long second to process what he had said, but after she did, ha. Mako laughed, a small tear forming at the corner of her eye. This was the first time someone had actually been bold enough to make a joke about her appearance. All right, good one. Let's just hope you're all bark and no bite. Whoosh. Mako closed the distance between herself and Sino in seconds. She could feel the cold wind biting into her skin, and although she was moving too fast for most, she could see perfectly clearly, her thighs as they tensed, her shin as it closed the distance, and her feet as they raced towards his head. Bang! Her foot slammed against his polearm, sparks flying as it sent him back a step. But he was upon her a second later, moving like a ghost. His slender body possessed a supernatural strength, and his speed was unlike anything she had ever seen. And yet, Mako could tell he was holding back. Polearm met fist, sending a shockwave rippling around them. Mako could feel her arms shaking from the force of the blow as she was suddenly pushed back. Sino blurred, appearing in front of her a second later, his body seemingly blending into darkness before reappearing. Mako felt the pain shortly after, a blunt, cold pain as the polearm slammed into her guard with a resounding bang. She was launched off the roof of the building, crashing into the street with so much force that a net of cracks spread through the road. Her head was foggy from the fall, and she could feel warm blood flowing from the side of her face as she slowly stood up, shaking off the dirt. Around her, a crowd was already forming. Is that Mako? What happened to her? Is there a villain up there? But Mirko ignored them all. Her eyes were instead fixed on the roof where the man stood, staring her down but not descending. Who is he? She was the number 5 hero. There were few people who could actually match her in a one-on-one fight, yet he was doing it with ease. Her eyes moved in the direction the other man had gone. It was clear that he was stalling, trying to stop her from getting to them. Why? Arg, she grunted in annoyance. There was no way he would let her reach them. The only way to get her answers was to beat them out of him. Boom. The pavement shattered as Mirko blasted into the sky, eyes locked on Sino. I guess it's about time I took things seriously. Show me how strong you are, dog mask. Mirko drove her foot right at his head, but the Mun lifted his polearm in time, catching her attack. She launched another kick, then a blow aimed at his head before going low in an attempt to take out his legs, but he nimbly dodged everything, only getting a slight graze as he jumped back. But the moment he landed, like a shadow, Mirko was already next to him. For the first time, his eyes widened at her speed as her fist crashed into his solar plexus, launching him into the next building. She cracked her neck. Where are you going? I'm not done with you. There was a thunderous bang as she lunged once more, delivering a bone-crushing kick that sent the Mun crashing into the side of the building. Smoke drifted from her chin as she stared at him, her eyes narrow and sharp. Mirko had expected him to be knocked out from the attack, but instead, he pulled himself from the rubble and dusted his clothes. When he looked at her, it was as though Mirko was staring into the depths of the abyss. His jovial nature had vanished, burning into nothing, and instead it was replaced by the cold composure of a warrior. He tossed his polearm to his back and it vanished into a wave of golden sparks. Then instead, electricity pulsed around his muscles, his eyes glowing like orbs of fire. Mirko's smile broadened as she pounded her fists together, waiting for his attack. When he moved, all she saw was a spark of electricity, glowing purple eyes, and revolving rings that poured out energy like a nuclear reactor. But the moment he got in her face, he disappeared, leaving only the tingling sensation as lightning danced over her skin and a gust of wind that blew her hair back. She was alone. Mirko sighed and ran her hand through her hair. Who was that guy? Strangely, she wanted to meet him again. They had unfinished business after all. Kyle took a deep breath and glanced at the large building in front of him before slowly walking to a nearby alley. After discreetly dropping the girl at the hospital entrance, he waited for a few minutes after the nurses took her in before going inside. With his enhanced senses, it didn't take long to locate the girl's room, and thankfully, from what he heard the nurses whispering amongst themselves, she would be fine. Thank goodness. If he had taken too much blood, then he would have had a murder case on his hands. Surprisingly, the bite marks that would have given away the cause of her anemia had shrunk so much that they were barely visible. Most likely one of the perks of being a vampire. I need to be more careful next time. His lack of control had most likely been due to his bloodline being unstable. Speaking of which, system, can I see the previous notification? In a split second, a blue screen appeared in front of him. Congratulations. Your bloodline is now stable. You have received plus 10 points to perception. Perception, 25 plus 10. Bloodline stability has unlocked your true vampire potential. Bonus stat points have been received. Strength, 70. Agility, 65. Perception, 55. Energy, 45. Defense, 37. Defense against wood, minus 47. Bloodline stability, 20%. Kyle felt new strength suddenly surge through his body like nothing he had ever felt before. His muscles felt firmer, his bones seemed tougher than iron, and his already heightened senses became even more impressive. He had felt strong after becoming a vampire, but this was leaps above that. He glanced around looking for anything he could use to test his strength when his eyes landed on a steel pipe that lay by the side of the road. There was a red substance at the center of the pipe. Kyle did not even want to think about what it was. He picked up the pipe and jogged into a nearby alley. When he was sure no one was watching, he held the pipe between his arms and applied pressure. It was too easy. The pipe folded faster than a cheating girlfriend at her best friend's place. Kyle smiled and tossed the pipe to the corner, flexing his fingers. That was when he heard an annoying snicker from behind him. He slowly turned and frowned. There were two people blocking the entrance of the alley. The first one had a spiked mohawk dyed green and several tattoos marring his face. He had one hand in his pocket and was bending so low that it looked as though his back was broken. Beside him was Mr. Hair Gel. His jet black hair was pulled back by an ostentatious amount of hair gel, and a spike chain was hanging from the side of his trousers. Kyle sighed. They looked like typical textbook villains. What did I expect? I'm in MHA after all. He had sensed them long ago but was waiting for them to make their move. It was the perfect opportunity to test his strength after all. Spiky took a step forward and smiled all the way to his ears. Look at what we've got here. Are you a lost boy? He said, his voice light and piercing. Hair Gel laughed and ran a comb through his hair. He looks lost to me. Hey kid, he said, looking Kyle over. Strip. An uncomfortable silence settled over the alley. Nobody made a move, they all just watched each other for a few seconds, then Kyle raised his hands and bowed slightly. I'm sorry man, I don't swing that way. Hair Gel's face blushed red in anger. Wah, what the hell are you talking about? I mean hand over everything you have, including your clothes. This is a robbery. Kyle scoffed and stood straight. And who is going to rob me? You two? Or the 5 guys you have behind me? Hair Gel's expression darkened, his fingers balled into a fist. Kyle had seen through his cheap intimidation as well as his ambush, which made his blood boil. Just as Kyle had expected, 5 men came into the open, each one holding a steel bat. This time, it was Mohawk that spoke. Kid, we don't want to hurt you, he said, licking his lips. You look like a rich kid, just hand us every, ah. Before he could finish, he was cut off by the sound of Kyle's laughter. Kyle grabbed his stomach, barely containing himself. Then he sighed and wiped a tear from his eyes. Who do you think you're talking to, punk? Mohawk screamed in rage and darted forward. A ball of green fire burst into life in his palms and he sent it flying. But as it was mere moments away from hitting Kyle, the boy disappeared. Bang! Mohawk's face was bashed in, blood exploding out of his broken nose. His body was sent flying right past Hair Gel, whose eyes widened as he watched his friend crash into a trash bin. When he turned back, his legs began to rattle, but he controlled himself. Gee, get him. What are you waiting for? Madness descended upon the alley as the 5 men suddenly lunged at Kyle, their bats raised high. To Kyle, they were incredibly slow. He took a step back as the first bat cut past the front of his face, the wind sending his bangs flying. He pivoted his feet and appeared in front of the man's face in a split second, then smiled. Before the man could even react, a heavy blow slammed into his gut. His eyes bulged out as spittle dripped from his mouth. He was knocked out on the spot. I guess I have to reduce the force. What the hell did you do to him? One of the men screamed, swinging wildly. This time Kyle did not dodge. Instead, he raised his hands. Clang! It was as though the thug had slammed his bat into concrete. A wave of vibration spread out through his body, and he dropped the bat to the floor. Kyle picked it up. The 3 men left shared anxious gazes, and Kyle rested it on his shoulder. Well, what are you waiting for? I don't have all day. He's just one man. Don't let his party tricks fool you. With an overly expressive battle cry, the first man sprinted forward, the other 2 behind him. Kyle weighed the bat in his hands and swung it forward. The bat exploded against the shoulder of the first man, but before he even fell, Kyle had moved to the next. A hit to the knees made him scream and reach for his knees, but all that was waiting for him was a knee to the face. The last thug tried to run. He had already made it to the end of the alley when Kyle pulled his hand backward and launched the bat. The steel weapon whistled through the air as it locked onto the man like a homing missile. There was a metallic bang, followed by the soft thump of a body collapsing to the floor. This was far too easy. Kyle dusted his shirt. As for you. He was about to turn to face Hair Gel when a sharp pain surged through his back. He stumbled forward, teeth gritted as what felt like liquid fire surged through his veins. What the hell? He turned around, his eyes locking on the perpetrator. Mr. Hair Gel was standing, legs practically shaking, but in his arm was a bat, not a metal bat. It was wood. Kyle reached for his back and pulled out the splinter that had pierced his skin. Then he looked back at the man, his eyes narrowed. And it was at that moment that Hair Gel realized, I've messed up, he said, tears rolling down his eyes. Kyle's body blurred, appearing before the Mun like a demonic shadow. His crimson eyes were glowing like embers, and there seemed to be an aura of rage around him. The Mun wanted to shrink. Thankfully, that was when his memory ended, because he fainted soon after. Kyle grabbed his body before he could collapse and angrily sank his teeth into his neck, almost on instinct. Quirk detected. Geolocation. Do you wish to extract this quirk? He smiled darkly. Yes. Drain when drinking the blood of an awakened individual. The host has the ability to extract their abilities and add them to his skills. Kyle stared at the glowing screen in front of him, his fangs still deep in the man's neck. Quirk detected. Geolocation. Do you wish to extract this quirk? Yes. Crimson energy burst out of his fangs like a haze of red steam. Kyle felt a strange energy flow into him, and the system created a perfect replica of the man's quirk. It took only a few seconds, and then another screen appeared before him. Quirk extracted. New skill obtained. Geolocation. Skill description. You can sense anything within a 100-meter radius. Kyle pulled his fangs out of the man's neck and wiped his lips. If he drank any more, then his life would be at risk. Geolocation, huh? The skill wasn't exactly bad. For someone like the thug, it was useless since it didn't matter if he could sense people. If he lacked the power to do anything about them, then the best he could do was run. But for someone like Kyle, he would be able to spot ambushes and set up ambushes of his own. If he didn't want to be found, then finding him would be very difficult. The only drawback of the quirk was that it was not a passive skill. He had to willingly use it for it to take effect. System status. Name, Kyle. Title, Bloodrat. Class, Ancestral Vampire. Skills, Drain, After Dark, Passive, Blood Manipulation, Bloodlust, Primordial Terror, Geolocation, Summons, Sino, General Mahamatra, Level 5, Quests, Nil. Strength, 70. Agility, 65. Perception, 55. Energy, 45. Defense, 37. Defense against wood, -47. Bloodline stability, 30%, hunger level, well federal. When did I level up? Kyle could not remember any notification like that. But the only thing that seemed similar to it was, bloodline stability, huh? Stabilizing his bloodline must have been enough to take him up by 5 levels. I guess that is enough for one day. By now, it was most likely very late into the night. Kyle still had no idea what the sun would do to him, so it was best he returned back to the apartment. There was just one problem. Kyle flew above the buildings and stared at the large city. From where he stood, each apartment building looked just like his own. It was impossible to differentiate them. Don't tell me I'm lost. Of course you are. You can't do anything without me, can you? Came a light voice from beside him. Unlike the first time, Kyle did not jump or scream bloody murder when he saw the tiny mouse sitting on his shoulders. Where were you? This was a pretty rough night, you know. Daisy stifled a laugh. I know. Ha ha ha. You should have seen your face, she said, moving to a full-blown laugh. You seemed ready to melt. Then the girl fainted. There is no better entertainment than humans. Kyle frowned and considered tossing the mouse off the roof. So you were watching. The little mouse was lying on her back now, laughing to her heart's content. Letting out a tired sigh, Kyle's feet slowly left the building as he ascended into the skies. Whatever, just show me the way home. The dark room was just as Kyle had left it. The mess he had made during his transformation had distorted the once untouched orderliness of the room, so he went to work fixing his mess. When he was done, he shut the curtains tightly and jumped into bed, feeling his body sink into the fabric. As he settled into the bed, Kyle felt his fangs retreating into his jaw up until they were just a bit longer than his regular teeth. But by that time, he was already fast asleep. The sound of his quiet breathing and slow beating of his heart brought warmth to the once quiet room. Gentle streams of sunlight stole into the quiet room, casting a golden glow over the table. The morning breeze was ruffling the curtains, creating a light whistling sound that blended with the quiet breaths of the lone occupant in the room. Kyle stirred in bed, rolling on his stomach and grunting slightly. He was hugging his pillow like an estranged lover, one leg perked up and one hand cradling his head. The quiet peace of the room was soon disturbed. The door to his room creaked open and a woman stepped in, whisking a bucket of water that stank of disinfectant. She let out a tired sigh and closed the door behind her. The lady, graceful in her every motion, wore a striking but simple black gown that accentuated her curvaceous body, stopping just at her mid-thigh. Dark freckles dotted her cheeks and nose, like drops of gold shaving on a white canvas, what was meant to be a blemish only serving to add character to her beauty. Her sharp gaze swept over the room, icy blue eyes taking every single detail into account. There was something wrong, but she could not just put her finger on it. It was as though someone had been here, but it shouldn't be possible. When she turned, her raven-black hair moved with her, bouncing like a spring as she fixed her eyes on the bed. Then her mouth hung open, her mind lost in thought. For a second she froze. Then the bucket of water fell from her hands, crashing against the floor. Kyle immediately sat up straight in his bed, eyes wide, only to catch a glimpse of a figure racing at him. Warm arms wrapped around his head, pulling his face into an ample bosom that cut off his air. He struggled in her grasp, but the woman was unwilling to let go. She had spent countless nights by his side, hoping that he would one day wake up from his coma. Yet, weeks turned to months and there was not a single sign. But now, he had miraculously returned to her. "Welcome back," she said, her voice trembling. "Little brother." Kyle was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the striking woman who had woken him up, the woman who was claiming to be his older sister. There was a round table in front of him with a steaming cup of hot coffee and a plate of various homemade cookies while the woman was working on making breakfast while humming a merry song. Little brother, huh? He had been so eager to test his powers that he left his room through the window instead of leaving like a normal person. Of course, an apartment had other rooms. He was a transmigrator. This was not his real body and the woman in front of him was not his real sister. Since he had no idea who she was and didn't want to be caught in a lie, he feigned amnesia. And thankfully, she bought it. According to her, he had been in a coma for about a month now and the doctors had told her that he might never wake up. To her surprise, he had woken up. If only she knew that the boy seated here was another person, then maybe she wouldn't smile at him the way she did. The woman turned to face him and then smiled before resuming her work. It was the type of smile that could thaw ice, which was strange considering how cold she normally looked. Who is she? She had already introduced herself as Tsumi, but Kyle could not recognize her from the anime, meaning she was not a popular hero or villain. Probably just a side character like me. You must be pretty confused since you lost all your memories. Tsumi glanced at him from over her shoulder. Kyle smiled nervously. Very, what kind of person was I? She paused and then glanced back at her food. A sizzling sound erupted from the pan as she flipped the bacon. Tsumi then cracked 2 eggs on the pan and began to stir. It might be better if you don't know that part. Huh? What does she mean by that? If Kyle wanted any hope of blending perfectly into this household, then he would need to know everything, from the slightest details to the most obvious character quirks. I feel strange not knowing. Kyle picked up a cookie and broke a piece of it. Tsumi sighed. Okay. There was a slight pause, then she placed her hands on her waist and turned dramatically, her icy gaze fixed on him. You were a menace. Ha. Kyle stopped chewing. It's really hard to speak badly about my brother, but you were a handful. I was the only one who could handle you. You can't be serious. Was she saying he had a terrible personality? If that was the case, wouldn't that mean he had a terrible relationship with other people? She placed a finger underneath her chin and glanced up at the ceiling. Although you are young and graduated early, instead of going to college, you spend all your time bullying the staff of your cafe. You once fired a guy for coming too early to work. Most people working with you either have no choice or have been blackmailed into not leaving. Even the customers are wary of you. You've been arrested a number of times for a variety of crimes. She lifted a finger as she began to list them out. Vandalism, abuse, underage driving some years back, body shaming and bullying, extortion, 3 counts of blackmail, stealing a man's crutches, identity theft, and arson. Kyle's mouth hung open. What the actual hell? You're kidding, right? He asked, his hands shaking from embarrassment. There was no way one person could be that bad. Tsumi shook with quiet laughter when she saw the expression on his face. She was enjoying this new version of him. He was innocent, too innocent. Like a little baby that was hers to enjoy. She grabbed the food and arranged it neatly on a plate and placed it on the table before sitting opposite him and resting her chin in her palms. She smiled as she watched him cringe from everything she had said, a strand of hair falling to block her face. How can I be joking? Those were the lighter crimes. He trembled like a newborn, sweat dripping down his face. Sumi laughed internally. If only I could keep him this way forever. If he were to regain his memories, it would only ruin this version of him. She sighed and sat back, slowly shaking her head. Don't worry, I've sorted every single one of those crimes for you. She said, her voice darker this time. Kyle raised a brow. What do you mean, sorted? Sumi smiled, but there was a certain darkness lurking behind those icy pupils. They won't bother you again. The only one allowed to torment you is me, my dear little brother. The breakfast was exquisite. Kyle ate till he was sure his belly would burst. As a vampire, there was a part of him that was scared he would be unable to taste food, but immediately the food touched his tongue, and he knew he was wrong. He cleared his plate in 5 minutes, washing everything down with a cup of coffee with an overdose of milk. Kyle was going to clear the plates like he normally did in his last life, but Sumi stopped him and took them to the sink. You should get ready, she said, the sound of the faucet drowning her voice. It's been weeks since you last visited your cafe. Your workers must miss you. She chuckled. Kyle was not sure of the last part. He hurried to his room and jumped into the shower, allowing the steaming hot water to wash away the sweat and grime from last night's adventures. When he got to his closet and pulled it open, Kyle raised a brow as he looked through it. Everything looked expensive. There were gold watches from luxury brands and exotic shirts and shoes more expensive than people's monthly wages. Come to think about it, even the furniture in the living room looked very expensive. Was I reborn as the son of a rich family? He picked up the simplest dress shirt and dressed up. There would be more opportunities to ask Sumi later. But for now, he needed to run a very important experiment. In the face of sunlight, would he glow? Or would embers be all that remained? Kyle was about to find out. Kyle walked towards the window like a mun on his way to his execution. Sweat appeared on his forehead as he reached for the curtain, then he paused, his finger brushing the light material. He took a deep breath. History had its various ways of representing vampires. Some described them as mad creatures with a bloodlust so great that they were nothing better than animals. Some defined them as creatures halfway between bat and human. But what concerned Kyle more was how their weaknesses were often presented. Sun, fire, and wood. Those were the 3 known weaknesses vampires had. Some books excluded some of them did, while others went as far as adding a few. He already knew what was detrimental to him. As for the other 2, he gulped. He was about to find out. Kyle stood at the corner of the room and grabbed the curtain, pulling it a little. His heart was pounding and his breathing was elevated. If it was up to him, he would not be trying this now. He could as well live his entire life in the dark, and he would do great. But it would be difficult to explain it to his sister, so he had to try. Taking a deep breath, Kyle was about to pull it open when, creak. His door was suddenly pushed open, the sound shocking Kyle. His hand on the curtain slipped, he somehow fell. And when he grabbed the curtain to steady himself, he pulled it down, the full might of the sun came upon him with a vengeance. Ah! Kyle screamed at the top of his lungs, hurling many unspeakable curses in his mind. But after a few seconds, he opened one eye. Sumi was still at the door, her arms crossed and her hips cocked slightly as she watched him with an unreadable expression. Huh? I'm fine. He stared at his hands, watching as the sun reflected against his skin, leaving it even more beautiful than before. I survived. Kyle's celebratory moment did not last for long because he soon remembered how he had reacted. His cheeks blushed red, right up to his ears, as he immediately stood up. He cleared his throat. Are you okay? Sumi asked, her eyebrows creased in concern. Kyle waved in a friendly manner. I'm fine. I slipped. Please take care of yourself, dear. It won't be good if you get into another coma so soon. He nodded, and after she gave the room one final glance, she turned to leave. Oh, I just came to tell you that we'll be leaving in 10 minutes. Hurry up, Would you? 10 minutes later. Kyle stepped out of the building beside his sister. He was dressed in a simple black dress shirt, trousers, and a pair of brown brogues that matched his belt. For his jewelry, he went for a slender golden necklace and a Rolex that he had found lying in the corner. His dressing stank of money. But even this expensive getup was no match for his sister. Kyle stopped himself from staring too much to avoid suspicion, but, at those diamonds? Her necklace was a white gold pendant with 3 sizable diamonds that shimmered like stars on her neck. She was in the same dark dress as earlier, but this time she had added on a pair of dark gloves. Her black hair was tied back in a strict high ponytail, leaving 2 slender bangs to fall by the sides of her face. After looking, she stared at him from head to toe, then smiled. "I see you're switching up your style." She nodded approvingly. "Shall we?" They walked up to an elevator and waited patiently as the platform descended, a light-hearted tune filling the otherwise silent space. The elevator went all the way down to the underground car park. Sumi led the way, her keys swinging in her hands as she strolled through countless cars. Kyle could see a number of expensive sports cars, which was expected since they could afford to live in a complex such as this. Sumi continued walking until she stopped in front of a peculiar car. Kyle's mouth hung open, his gaze locked on the car that looked more like a Tiger mid-pounce. Bentley Continental GT. The car alone cost more than his entire life before his reincarnation. No, it cost more than 2 of them. I was reborn into such a family? An unconscious smile crept up to Kyle's face. "Remind me again, sis. What do you do for a living?" She clicked the button and the doors made a clicking sound, both front doors unlocking. She turned to him, and then for the first time since the short moment he had known her, her expression shifted slightly. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. "We run a mining company in the city. Dad left it to us before he died. Let's go." Kyle nodded and got into the passenger seat. The drive to his cafe was uneventful. When she dropped him off, she smiled at him and waved him goodbye before stepping on the gas. Eyes followed the car as it went down the street, the onlookers trying to figure out who the striking and wealthy woman was. But Kyle, on the other hand, had his eyes on the building, his supposed cafe. The building was decent. It was in a good part of the city, close to a school, no less, which meant he had a constant stream of customers. Without wasting a second, Kyle walked into the cafe. "Good morning. Welcome to Eek, sir." The girl who was greeting him bowed low, so low that Kyle wondered if she wanted to kiss the floor. Act nonchalant. He thought to himself. If his character greatly differed from what others knew, then they would only grow wary. Kyle put on his most demeaning face and stared down at the girl. "And who are you?" The girl stiffened like a rod. "Yes, sir, why you hired me. Speak faster and stop stuttering, you're going to give me a headache." You're a bit too good at this, don't you think?" came a whisper from within his shirt. Kyle stylishly covered his mouth and whispered back. "I've had some practice." I'm sorry. You hired me 2 months ago as the sales girl, sir." Kyle glanced at her, noticing the way her arms were quivering. The poor girl was on the verge of tears. How cruel had the former owner of his body been? He sighed. "I have my work cut out for me. Good work keeping the place together while I was gone." The girl's eyes widened. Did he just compliment her? She had been insulted so much that her kind struggled to find out the meaning behind the words. Up until she realized what he meant. Tears flowed out of her eyes as though a dam had broken loose. "Please don't fire me. I need this job." Huh? How did she come to that conclusion? Kyle wondered, watching the girl. But before he could say anything, the store bell chimed as someone walked into the cafe. Kyle was already turned to see who his first customers would be when he froze. Memories suddenly flashed in his vision. Darkness. Blood. A tantalizing aroma. A feeling of pure ecstasy as a warm fluid slipped down his throat. "You." The girl had a thin slip of bandage wrapped around her head, and her tired eyes roamed the room nonchalantly. But once her gaze met his, her expression twisted to one of pure terror. She was the girl from the night before. The girl whose blood he had drunk. The girl he had nearly killed. Sakura had been having a terrible day, no, a terrible week. She had gone out to have drinks with her friends to end up in a hospital, and yet, she had to leave the hospital early, despite the warning of her doctors, just so that she could rush to work. When she arrived in front of the cafe, she took a deep breath and pushed the doors open, walking into the establishment. But just a few seconds after she walked in, her body froze up. There was a demon in front of her. Scratch that, it was the devil himself. He was tall with crimson-red eyes that mirrored his bloodlust and rough, roguish black hair that fell down to his chin.
Kyle.
She screamed at the top of her voice, only to cover her mouth with both her hands.
Oh no.
She was so shocked by his appearance that she had said his name out loud instead of calling him boss. She was dead. Tears began to form in her eyes, her body shivering like a child in the cold. Meanwhile, Kyle was more than shocked. Standing before him was the girl who he had bitten last night. Memories he would rather not remember began to flood his mind. The warm, invigorating taste of her blood on his tongue, the feeling of lightning coursing through his veins with each gulp, and the maddening hunger that came along with it. He needed more. He wanted another taste. Kyle licked his lips, staring at her like she was a 5-course meal. Damn it, Kyle, focus. He pinched his arm, returning to his original thought process. When he drank her sweet blood. It was dark and she was heavily drunk. But if she remembered even the faintest thing about the Mun who had attacked her, then he could kiss his comfortable life goodbye. He immediately turned around to avoid her staring at him for too long, his heart beating like he had just run a marathon. I need to get back to my office, he thought, and began walking, his steps quick but not so fast that they would know he was running. The moment Kyle turned his back on her and began walking away, Sakura knew she was in trouble. In all her life, he had never done that, no matter how horrible the mistake she made was. His reaction could only mean one thing. He is pissed. Kyle was nearly at his office when she sprinted toward him, standing between him and his office door. She bowed her head multiple times in apology, feeling a light tingling in her head from her injury. After a few seconds, she looked up at his face. Her heart dropped. His jaw was tightly clenched, his crimson eyes staring down at her like a hawk did its prey. And his hands, they had tightened into fists and were slowly shaking with rage. Sakura. He began, his words like poison. How is your head? Sakura felt her spirit leave her body. How is my head? She had gone drinking with friends and had stayed up so late that she completely blanked out. When she woke up, she was in the hospital and had this injury, but she could not remember the details. But why was he asking about it? The answer came to her a second later. Is he trying to say the injury was nothing compared to what he would do to her? There was one time she had messed up a customer's order and Kyle threw the coffee mug right at her face. Her life had flashed before her eyes back then, and she wasn't even as angry as she is right now. Sakura's eyes strolled down to his fist and she held her head with both hands. She was not very smart, but she still needed her head to pass college. She took a step back only to bump her butt against his office door. Cold sweat began running down her face. And then he raised his fists and brought them down on her head with enough force to crush a melon. She yelped and immediately squatted, curling into a ball to protect her tender skull. Why did she have to stand between me and the door? Kyle wondered. He had tried to escape and recollect his thoughts, but she had run after him and was now blocking his way. Worst of all, she was showing no signs of moving. His hands were shaking beside him in nervous anticipation. Any moment now and she might recognize him, then all hell would break loose. The heroes would come barging into his house like a SWAT team on steroids, and even if he was strong, they would just keep coming until they had him behind bars. I need to get out of here. He had no choice. He had to move her. He reached for her shoulder to gently push her out of the way, but the girl recoiled like a frightened mouse, rolling into a ball at the base of the door. What the hell is she doing? Kyle screamed in his mind. Damn it. With no other choice, Kyle picked her up like a child, her body shuddering as he touched her. Then he carried her into his office and shut the door behind him with a bang. There was no point in running or delaying his fate. If she remembered anything about that night, then he would find out right now and decide what to do next. Akiko, the salesgirl that Kyle had met when he first arrived, stared at the door, unsure of what to say. What just happened? She had expected Kyle to chew Sakura out the moment she called him by his first name, yet he only seemed very angry and nothing else. It was almost as strange as how he had complimented her a few minutes ago. So much so that she wondered if it was even Kyle or another man wearing his face. But now she knew why. He had lured her towards his office and snatched her up like a tiger, locking her in so she could not escape. Should I call the heroes? If she didn't take action, then Sakura would be visiting the hospital very soon. Her eyes darkened slightly. Or the cold room. She muttered. But if she called the heroes and Kyle's rich sister managed to buy him out, then she would be the next person in need of an ambulance. Ding ding. Akiko was pulled out of her thoughts by the sound of the doorbell. She immediately turned to the customer and smiled brightly. Welcome to Crimson Cafe. Please take a seat, I'll be with you in a moment. She said, humming a pleasant tune. Sorry Saku, you're on your own. Darkness enveloped a room like a thick cloud of nothingness. Shadows clung to the walls like a curse, slowly shifting when the flickering light overhead would sway. There was a thick smell of dust and abandonment, which was only natural. The space was once a bustling bar but was now completely devoid of customers. Chairs stood idle in front of tables that had been long forgotten, dust clinging to every aspect of them. Yet, in the abandoned bar there was one man present, a young man who sat idly at the counter, scratching his neck every now and then. Multiple eerie hands lined his body, the limbs as though alive clinging to him as though afraid to let go. This man was Shigaraki Tamura. He sat in the blissful silence of the room for a few seconds until something changed about the darkness. The darkness suddenly felt more alive. Shigaraki raised his head and peered into the darkness, then a dry smile appeared on his lips as he scratched his neck. Then he spoke, as though the darkness could hear him. How are the preparations going? Two yellow eyes suddenly split the darkness apart, narrowing as they locked on Shigaraki. We have found the location of the special training program. Shigaraki's fingers thrummed over the table. Who will be in charge of the students? The darkness shifted slightly, a low thrum spreading through the room. Aizawa, 13, and All Might. Silence. Then laughter erupted in the empty space, the sound echoing through the room. Shigaraki's fist tightened as a bright smile appeared on his face. Perfect. He stood up, pocketed his hands, and then walked right into the darkness, the cloud of black absorbing his entire form. Gather the League. It's about time we paid UA a visit. The darkness vanished, freeing the room from its oppressive weight, but along with it, Shigaraki was gone. Kyle was twirling a pen in his hands, his expression relaxed as he breathed out a sigh. So you are saying you don't remember anything from last night? Sakura hesitated before nodding. This was the 5th time he had asked her this question, and hearing her repeat the same answer filled him with joy. My cover is safe. He melted into his chair, a small smile on his face. When he remembered that Sakura was still seated in front of him, he sat up straight and his expression hardened. Kyle picked up a stack of papers for no reason and began organizing them. So you were late and this is the best excuse you could come up with? Drunkenness and amnesia. Sakura stiffened. I'm sorry, sir. Will your apology pay for the damages you have caused me for being late? She shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her eyes darting from place to place. I was just 5 minutes. What? More excuses. The audacity of this girl. Kyle was fully in character. I'm sorry. It will never happen again. But isn't it your fault that she is late? Daisy asked, her voice barely audible. Kyle pinched the spot of his shirt where she was hiding, and she let out a loud yelp. Sakura immediately jumped to her feet, her eyes wide. What was that? Did a rat find its way into the cafe? A rat? I am a mouse. Daisy whispered sharply. She was struggling to jump out of his shirt and assault Sakura, but Kyle kept her in place with a single finger. Let me at her, let me at her. Ignoring her, Kyle continued. I'll let you off with a warning this time. Try not to drink so late into the night next time, MMMH. Kyle froze, his hand shaking slightly and his face blushing red. Sakura took a step toward him. Sir? Are you okay? What? I'm fine, I'm fine. Heh. You can go. Sakura stared at him, unsure of how to react. He had let her go with just a warning. He didn't even cut her salary in half like last time. What are you waiting for? I said you can leave. Yes, sir. She yelped and practically sprinted out of the room. Immediately the door was shut. Ah,
Daisy.
the little rat had bitten him in the chest. He pulled her out and tossed her to the table, gasping breathlessly. How could something so tiny cause so much pain? Daisy pouted, her tiny hands folded across her chest. This is why Kyle was about to scold her when he heard a certain voice, one he had heard many times in the past. Although the person was in the cafe, he could easily hear her with his enhanced sense. Is that midnight? He adjusted his shirt and shot a glare at Daisy before walking out of his office. Sitting at a table at the end of the cafe was none other than Midnight and another person who was most likely an academy professor. Kyle walked to the reception and began fumbling with different tools under the pretext of working, but he was actually listening in on their hushed conversation. Akiko's posture straightened to the sight of him, while Sakura kept her eyes locked on the plates she was washing. Yes, the USJ training should help them get a proper feel of how real-life situations will be, Midnight said, cradling her cup of coffee in her hands. Will All Might really tutor them himself? I wish he would make a guest appearance in my class one of these days.
Sure.
Midnight's gaze strolled to where Kyle and his workers were. None of them were looking her way. They seemed more engrossed in their work than paying attention to their conversation. Besides, the distance was too great for them to overhear anything. She turned back to the professor. Let's keep all discussions about him on hold until we get back. Immediately after she finished speaking, Kyle grabbed a cupcake from the display and strolled back to his office.
USJ.
He bit into the cupcake and pushed the door to his office open. Where have I heard of it before? It took only a few seconds for it to click in his mind, and when it did, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Unforeseen simulation joint. I guess the Villain League is finally going to make their move. It was about time Kyle made his move as well. Make sure you are at work early tomorrow morning. And no late-night drinking, Kyle said, his eyes locked on Sakura when he said the last part. The two girls bowed slightly before scurrying away from the cafe. It was closing hour, 9 p.m. sharp, the time when most people would already be at their homes, eating dinner, or watching a TV show just before bed. The night was livid, just as it always was. Up above, the moon was bathing the world in its pale white glow, the light mixing with the thousands of streetlights and lights shining out of countless windows. There was a pleasant coolness in the air, and that cool, refreshing breeze was mixed with the alluring scent of blood. Hunger level, moderate. Kyle was hungry, but not the kind of hunger that would push him to the nearest McDonald's and motivate him to eat far more than a healthy amount. He was hungry for another thing that night, and that was blood. With his hands in his pocket, he traced the path Sakura had taken with his eyes. Even after leaving, her accent still clung to the streets. It would just take a few seconds to get to her. He slowly shook his head. Sakura had done something to him. It was only because of her that he now knew there was a vast difference between various types of blood. It was like getting a taste of a premium subscription only to go back to gruel. He did not like it very much. And yet, harassing his staff was not on the agenda for the day. According to the story, the Villain League would make their move on UA in 2 days' time. Shigaraki's plan was to permanently destroy the mindset of the students at UA and kill All Might with the help of his biologically modified Nomu. This was the first time the Villain League was revealed to the public, as well as the first time a Nomu was brought to light. But things were not going to play out as they ought to, not if Kyle had anything to say about it. The situation was just too perfect. A Nomu that was capable of going toe-to-toe with All Might would soon be brought to light, and he knew exactly when and where. How could he not capitalize on it? He leaned on the glass door of his shop, watching as cars drove by, their lights piercing through the darkness. The blaring lights reminded him of his past life. He remembered it as if it were yesterday. He and his friends had gone out for drinks just after his final college thesis. It was the most memorable time of his life. They had toured restaurant after restaurant and bar after bar, using the money they had saved up for 5 years in college to enjoy themselves. But when it was finally time to go home, their car was knocked to the side by a police cruiser attempting to do a 360 degrees drift on a public highway. Kyle did not resent the police for no reason. He understood that they were doing their job, but at the same time, were they really out to protect the civilians? Some were, but not all. A lot of them lived their lives as though they were in the Grand Theft Auto simulation, driving like they were the main characters in Tokyo Drift. Many didn't really care about the safety of others. They just liked the fun of putting another man down and the legal right to carry arms that being a cop gave them. It was the same with MHA, so much so that villains like Stain had risen to go against the system. Maybe Kyle's entire ideology was bullshit. Yes, he was well aware of that. He pushed himself from the door and began strolling down the streets. I just really dislike them. Both heroes and villains. Shigaraki, All Might, Endeavor, and All for One. I will stop them all. And then he would create a new world order on the ashes of the old world. A world where millions would not be killed in a clash between both parties framed as protecting the city. A world where everyone went about their activities like normal sane people. Not men and women jumping up and down in spandex uniforms. The ideology of heroes versus villains was a mental illness. And Kyle, he was the cure. He pulled into a dark alley and blasted into the air, soaring through the skies like a ballistic missile. But in order to take down the status quo, he needed power. He needed that Nomu, and to get the Nomu, he had to first stabilize his bloodline. Ding. New quest. Quest details: stabilize your bloodline, duration, 24 hours. Rewards: complete stat upgrade. Failure: nil. The thick smell of tobacco hung in the air, wisps of white smoke drifting around the room. In the dark room, only one light hung overhead, casting its light upon a large table. Racks of cards, chips and stray dice decorated the table, hinting at an illegal gambling operation. The table was surrounded by more than a dozen villains, some of repute, while others were lowly thugs trying to make a name for themselves in society. The game began, each person clinging to their cards as if they were part of their soul. Dice were sent flying, chips were tossed here and there, and cards were being flipped like battle swords. But in the thick of the game, just when a winner was to be decided, the door to their private room creaked open. A figure stepped into the space and looked the room over. But even at the sight of multiple dangerous villains, he did not turn back. Instead, he smiled. He was dressed in all black from head to toe. A hood shrouded his face in mysteries, and an ornate domino mask made of pure gold rested just above his nose. He began walking, his footsteps reverberating across the quiet room. Each step was measured and each stride calculated. He was making a statement. No one made an attempt to stop him. They just watched as he walked up to them and took the empty seat at the head of the table. The seat is reserved for the big boss. He smiled and crossed his legs. Gentlemen, be glad. Silence. He picked up a pair of dice and tossed them to the table. The two pieces raced across the wood until they stopped in the middle of the table. A perfect 6. The villains began to sweat because they could tell. This man was trouble. He smiled, revealing pearly white teeth and sharp fangs that gleamed in the light. Today, you will all have the pleasure of being my next meal. The men shared anxious glances and then one burst out with laughter. He held his face and laughed so hard that his eyes bulged out in mirth. Kyle just sat there, gently tapping his hands on the table. The villains who had once been anxious slowly began to join him, their laughter chasing away their fear. Where do you think you are, kid? Do you wanna die? Yura, this ain't a Halloween party, punk. I'll crush your bones to dust. Their jeers continued, but Kyle gave no reaction, up until one of them stood from his seat. So far, even with their insults, no one had dared lay a finger on him. But one man, a little bolder than the rest, grabbed his coat and attempted to lift him up. But the moment his hands made contact with the black leather, a fist flew out of the darkness, rocking the man's world. It was a simple blow, yet he was thrown right across the room, his body landing hard on the opposite wall. He slid down to the floor, staining it with his blood. He was out cold. Silence. The darkness behind Kyle rippled softly and a figure emerged. On his head was a hat resembling the head of a jackal, and his white hair was a stark contrast to the rippling darkness surrounding him. He gave the room one glance and smirked. It seems you guys are all out of cards now, he said, giggling to himself. No one moved, no one laughed. They just stared at him. Was that a joke? Came a low whisper from somewhere in the crowd. The awkward silence stretched on until someone screamed in rage. What the hell are you waiting for? Get them! Quirks burst into life. Ice, chains, sound waves, and a lot of others unleashed madness upon the tiny space. But Kyle was highly disappointed. He had hoped he would find a usable quirk at the very least. Garbage, it is all garbage. Sino dashed into the crowd, cutting through the villains like a ferocious shadow. Meanwhile, Kyle stood, one leg on the chair, one hand in his pocket. The first villain came, swinging his glowing fist with all his might. His body was coated with a strange energy and his eyes reflected the gleam. When he got close, he let out a loud battle cry, tightening his fists even further. But with his advanced senses, Kyle could tell his ability was worthless. He placed his leg beneath the chair and lifted it up with ease, sending it exploding against the man's face. Before he could recover, Kyle had already appeared at his back. He grabbed the unfortunate man's collar and hoisted him into the air. The man screamed, kicking and flailing his arms. "Don't be like that," Kyle said, an evil smirk on his face. "Take the pain like a man." His voice strained as he brought the man down on the poker table, his body crashing right through it. He took a step to the side as a dagger cut tight past him, nearly nicking his skin. The attacker was moving his arms around like a party entertainer while jumping from foot to foot like he was Goku. But even with the elaborate movements, he was barely controlling a single dagger. I should have hit the villain joint next door instead. Kyle caught the dagger easily and tossed it right at the man. The blade cut past him, slicing his cheek and embedding itself right in the wall behind him. He gulped. The will to fight fled his body faster than people disappeared after hearing Sino's jokes. Kyle was beside him in a second. His eyes reflected his fear as Kyle sank his teeth into his neck. Bloodline stability, 30 to 35%. As Kyle removed his teeth from the unconscious man, he sighed tiredly. His quirk was so useless that Kyle did not even bother reading the notification, but the annoying thing was that his blood was also terrible. The taste of blood was borderline disgusting, at least compared to Sakura's. Maybe it is a gender thing. He twisted his head slightly as a bat came flying past his face. He tripped the man and dug his foot into his back, sending him crashing into the floor. As the villain stood up, his feet shaky, Kyle sampled his blood as well. Not bad, but nowhere near premium. He glanced lazily across the room and then he moved, tearing everything apart. Using his vampiric speed, Kyle laid waste to every single villain around. It took less than 5 minutes because Sino had already beaten up too many to count. And at the end of it, Bloodline stability, 90%, Kyle glanced at his stat screen, checking through the quirks he had copied during the fight. There were only two that had caught his eyes: Wind Barrier and Aura Punch. Wind Barrier creates a durable shield of pure condensed oxygen. The shield can be made both flexible and hard and can be manipulated based on your wish. Aura Punch summons your internal energy to deliver a blow powered by your will. The Wind Barrier was obviously good. But Aura Punch? It was insane. The person who had the quirk had a weak internal energy, which was why he was defeated easily. But in the hands of someone like Kyle, who had an ancestral vampire bloodline, his punches would hit far harder. "I guess it's time to go, Sino." Tap tap as the groans of the unconscious villains filled the room. Footsteps so loud that they reached his ears rang through the space. Kyle could hear a strange sound, like recoiling threads being twisted and reformed with each passing second. At first he was confused, but he figured out who it was a second later. There was only one person who could make such sounds. The sound of slow, melodious clapping followed the sound of his footsteps as the figure appeared from the darkness. The man was large, so tall that his head nearly brushed the door frame. And his build? More than muscular. In fact, he was so ripped that the muscles fled his skin, curling around his arms and pulsing with a destructive level of strength. He pounded his fists together and a shockwave cut through the room, shattering glass all around them. He smirked. "Who left the window open? It looks like a kinky little vampire bat has wandered in." Muscular. The big boss had finally arrived. Since coming to this world and gaining his vampire bloodline, Kyle had gone from fighting one weakling to another. Maybe to others, they would have put up a fight, but to him, they were just a little above trash. But today was different. This wasn't some random character that had a chainsaw for a head or a knife-throwing maniac. This was the real deal, a villain who took on the full load of Deku's quirk with ease. Deku had to go above and beyond for this one. Kyle's bloodline had not advanced, so he was nowhere near his peak strength, and yet. Sino, evacuate the area and make sure no hero interrupts this fight. He knew that the moment their clash began, the entire area would be wrecked beyond recognition. There was no way a hero or two would not notice. Sino nodded and blended into the darkness, leaving the two of them alone. Muscular's face darkened as he cracked his neck. "You really think you can handle me alone? You overconfident little shit." Kyle pulled back his hoodie, his golden mask reflecting the light. In just 2 days' time, he would be fighting an All Might grade Nomu and possibly clash with All Might himself. If he could not take Muscular, then he might as well sit out that fight. "If you're done talking rubbish, it's about time we began," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. Muscular smirked, his muscles bubbling like a spring on the verge of exploding, and then he disappeared. Whoosh. Muscular appeared right in front of him a second later, his gigantic body towering over him like a titan.
He's fast.
Bang. Wood splinters shot into the air as his fist crashed into the spot Kyle had been, causing the room to shudder. Kyle was already at his back, his feet cutting through the air. But before he could land a solid kick, Muscular spun, catching him by surprise. He tried to grab Kyle's leg, but Kyle managed to evade in time, pushing his leg back and doing a flip right above Muscular. Immediately his feet landed, he twisted his body. A gigantic muscular fist cut right past his head, the resulting wind sending his hair in a spiral. In one fluid motion, he adjusted his footing, turning around just in time to meet Muscular's blow with a punch of his own. Boom. An invisible shockwave cut across the room as the two fighters collided, each one showcasing a frightening degree of strength. Kyle felt every single bone in him quake as the force coursed through his body, rattling his spine. Muscular smiled, a crazed look on his face as he watched Kyle. Their fists were moving so fast that the average person would only see the after images, each blow sending ripples across the space. "What's wrong, kid? Don't tell me this is all you've got," he sneered. Muscular's quirk allowed him to tank every single blow Kyle would throw at him, but as for Kyle, every single punch was like getting hit by a steamroller. His smaller body made sure that the force spread everywhere. He could even feel his third leg tingling in protest. Yes, the vibrations reached there as well. The barrage of blows stopped for a second, and then Muscular's muscles expanded, becoming even larger and more powerful than before. The next punch that came was far faster than anything Kyle had ever seen and bore enough force to rip into a mountain. Muscular's fist reflected in Kyle's crimson eyes as the blow charged right at his face. He twisted his head, but he was too slow. "Die!" Muscular screamed in glee. Bang! The fist ripped right through Kyle's cheek, a wave of fresh crimson blood cascading down the cut. He was dazed, but it lasted less than a second. He gritted his teeth and grabbed onto the arm. Muscular's eyes widened in shock as he twisted around his body like a serpent, jumping right above him. And then he brought his heel down on the back of his head like a sledgehammer. Crack! Muscular was sent down to his knees, spittle bursting from his mouth as his body caved. His muscles could do little to defend against the raw power Kyle had poured into the kick. He fell face first to the messy floor, heaving a breath. But Kyle was not foolish enough to think that was enough to bring him down. He lunged forward, raising his feet once more to knock him out when, damn it! Kyle immediately jumped back, trying to get as far away from him as possible, but Muscular was faster. His muscles spun around his body like a storm of flesh, reforming around his entire frame. His biceps had long swollen past human levels, but now, they were even bigger. His triceps were like the size of barrels and his chest expanded like a balloon, full of unhinged strength. "Come on," he licked his lips. "Let's play a little longer." He slammed both hands into the floor, creating an explosion that shattered the room. Kyle had already jumped back, but the force of the explosion met him, sending him right out of the building. He hadn't even landed when Muscular appeared out of the debris, racing towards him like a mun possessed. He lifted both arms to block, but when the fist met him, it cut through his defenses like they were paper. His arms parted and the blow dug deep into his gut, sending blood gushing out of his mouth. Boom! Kyle's body crashed right into another building, breaking wall upon wall until he settled in the debris, the building crumbling atop him. Muscular let out a steamy breath, the smoke and dust settling around him. He cracked his neck and placed his hand on it, bringing back blood. That punk was something. It was the first time he had fought anyone capable of lasting so long against him in a fistfight. Too bad, he's dead now. Muscular stared at the debris for a few minutes and breathed out a sigh. Damn, I love kids. I would have loved to play a little longer. He turned around, about to leave, when he heard a rustle from behind him.
Impossible.
Boom. He immediately turned, smiling from ear to ear when the rubble exploded. A wave of red matter cut through the concrete and tiny bits of stone were sent flying past him. Spider-like limbs tore out of the earth like an image from a grotesque nightmare, and then it pulled out a figure from the mess of blood and stone.
It was Kyle.
His body was red from bruises, and he was bleeding profusely, but every single ounce of that blood was combining with the bloody limbs around him. Then limbs coalesced, forming around his head until they formed a hollow of blood, glowing with ethereal crimson light. Kyle smiled, blood dripping from the side of his lips as he watched Muscular.
Come, I'll make you my bitch.
Super strength and flight were not the only perks that came with becoming a vampire. There were a few other skills Kyle had not used since his awakening. It was not that he couldn't use them or that he was saving them for last. He just had never seen any real use for them. But now, Muscular had proved his strength. He had shown that it would take more than his strength alone to defeat him. Muscular cast a lazy gaze on the crimson halo on his head and frowned. Is that it? He sprinted towards him, driving his fist right towards Kyle. I expected to see something better. Bang! Kyle took 3 steps back, the ground where he once stood shattering under the oppressive weight of Muscular's blow. Muscular grabbed the ground, his fingers digging into the concrete, then propelled himself, driving his feet forward. Kyle did not move an inch, he just stood still as the foot came right at his face. Boom! The wind from the kick cut past Kyle, sending his hood spiraling and his hair billowing back. But the foot never met him. Instead, it hung in the air, blood as thick as metal bars wrapping around Muscular's leg.
Kyle smiled darkly. What the?
Whoosh. Muscular was pulled into the air, the blood tightening around his feet like tentacles. It launched him several feet into the air before bringing him down on the hard pavement. Chips of concrete flew out of the muscular-shaped hole that formed, dust scattering around him. Muscular coughed up dirt. Ouch. That really hurt. He flexed his muscles, a psychopathic look in his eyes, and he stood up. Now I really do want to kill you. Kyle waved his hand towards him and the air trembled. The halo exploded, sending blood strings in all directions. The strings clung onto everything, lamp posts, buildings, cars, and everything else in sight, creating a labyrinth of webs. Muscular moved through the webs, making his way forward, and then he reached to grab him. But just as his fingers grazed his shirt, whoosh! The blood strings condensed, and then in an instant, Kyle was pulled away, dragged into the wiry maze. The wind was filling his ears, penetrating his clothes as he soared through the air, and then more blood strings grew taut, pulling him in different directions. Muscular stared up at the labyrinth and swung, catching nothing but thin air. Each time he would be so close to landing a hit, Kyle would be pulled out of reach. Stay still, you fuck. In a split second, Kyle appeared behind him. Muscular tried to jump to the side, but several strings blocked his path. Crack! Kyle drove his elbow right into his back, his elbow digging deep into his thick flesh. Muscular stumbled forward but caught himself before he could fall. He twisted his body, his forearm speeding to his back, but Kyle levitated above the punch. Another blood string wrapped around his waist, pulling him right in front of Muscular. Shit. Muscular tried to fix his footing, but Kyle's fist was already reflecting in his pupils. Bam! Kyle delivered a series of explosive blows, little shockwaves resounding after every punch. Then he jumped, landing 2 heavy kicks right to his face. Stumbling back, Muscular lifted his arms in defense, his body aching from the weight of the assault. Damn you! He tried to counterattack, but the blood strings wrapped around his body, rendering him immobile. Kyle reared back his hand, a dark red aura forming on his fist. He supercharged the skill until the energy was wide and uncontained, pulses of steam flowing around him. Muscular's eyes widened, his jaw clenched as he braced for impact. Aura punch. Boom. His fist dug right into Muscular's gut. Energy exploded from the point of impact, coiling around Kyle's hand and reinforcing the blow. He bucked, but something was waiting for him, another heavy kick that cracked his head up. And for good measure, an elbow strike to the solar plexus sent him several meters back, shattering a nearby building to rubble. Kyle let out a tired breath and shook his hand, his arms aching from the volley. His muscles are a problem. Because of blood manipulation, he currently had an edge over Muscular. But unless he could drastically boost the force behind his blows, it would take far too long to take him down. I have to end this fight fast. Sino could only hold back so many heroes. Kyle pulled back all the blood strings to his hands and then they solidified, forming two razor-sharp daggers. What was left of the villain's hideout exploded and Muscular stepped out of the rubble. His muscles were red, multiple bruise marks marring his body as he stepped forward. Tired of your little party trick? He sounded out of breath, and yet he barked, a look of disgust on his face. Kyle adjusted his mask. You talk too much. He might have been surprised at first by Muscular's monstrous strength, but now that he had experienced it firsthand, the match was basically over. After all, Muscular was not fighting a regular version of Kyle. He was fighting a supercharged version, even without his bloodline stability. Bloodlust. The host has a maddening drive for blood. When this craving is satisfied, he will gain a 50% all-round boost. After dark, passive during nighttime, the host gains a 50% buff to all skills and stats. Muscular pushed his tired body in a futile attempt to end the fight, but there was a limit to how much punishment one could take. He was getting slower. A fist grazed Kyle's cheek as he closed the distance between them. He swung his dagger, and blood came gushing out. Another swing, and Muscular's arm fell limp. In the space of a second, he delivered several other strikes, spewing blood all over the streets. Muscular stood wide-eyed, unable to move. He could barely walk an inch without collapsing. What did you do to me? Kyle strode towards him, blood dripping down the tip of his dagger. It didn't matter how strong you were or how much muscle you had. Tendons, nerves, blood vessels. As long as he got them all, he would be like a machine without controls. Useless. Don't mess with me. Kyle delivered one last resounding blow right to his temple. His head rocked back, but before he could fall, Kyle grabbed onto him and sank his teeth right into his neck. Ding. Quirk detected. Muscle augmentation. Do you wish to extract this quirk? Kyle smirked. Yes. As usual, the blood glowed a bright crimson, a red haze surrounding them as Muscular's quirk was copied. Success. Congratulations. Mission complete. Bloodline stability, 100%. Energy is coursing through your veins. Stand by. You are undergoing an evolution. Kyle's vision blurred and then the world began to spin. The next thing he felt was the cold floor pressing against his face. Several police officers were scattered around a destroyed district, going from place to place to gather evidence. Buildings had been crushed, a few cars dented and the road damaged beyond repair. The cost to fix the district would be astronomical. The police chief sighed tiredly as he took in the scene. What the hell happened here? It was as though two giants had turned the area into a battlefield. Don't tell me we have another one on our hands. These days, since All Might became less active, villains have been popping up like flies. It was almost like there was a new one each week. Normally, they weren't a problem for the heroes. The heroes were properly trained to deal with these situations, while most villains were petty crooks with powers. But this. He stared at the clean cut that lined the road and streets. The solid concrete and asphalt had been cleaved through as though it were paper. There were signs of multiple quirks as well. Could it be him? The thought of it sent a shiver down his spine. History's greatest villain. A man who wielded quirks like drawing water from a limitless well. He was a collector, a man so vile that it took the entire hero industry to bring him down. Right now, there had been no word from that man, and yet, whose work could this be? As the police chief contemplated what had happened, there was a blur of red as a figure descended from the skies. Large majestic wings fluttered at his back like that of an angel. The wind from his descent ruffled his blonde hair. Hawks. Chief Kenji. It looks like you guys have it rough. What happened here? Hawks asked, his eyes sharp as he stared at the streets. He had no doubt gotten an aerial view of the impact area from the sky, but that was not what he wanted to know. Hawks wanted the details that couldn't be gotten at first glance. We still know little about what happened, but we found several unconscious villains in the area. The most notable being Muscular. Muscular. Hawk's eyes widened in shock. Muscular was no mere thug. He was a serial killer who murdered people just for the fun of it. Even some of the most talented heroes wouldn't stand a chance against him. Does that mean we are dealing with a hero? Kenji slowly shook his head and began walking, Hawks following closely by his side. No hero would take Muscular down without waiting to report the case to the police. They paused at the remnants of a bar. The area had been marked off by yellow tape and a few officers were gathering whatever clues they could find. But oddly enough, he was not alone. Would you believe it if I told you that there were no civilian deaths? Not even an injured passerby. Hawks took a second to reply, allowing his words to settle in, then he sighed. So we are dealing with 2 unidentified vigilantes. Great, it looks like I'll have a busy weekend. Kenji nodded. But that isn't all. Hawks sighed and smiled tiredly. Really? Come on, Kenji, give me a break. Hawks paused when he realized the mood had shifted. Kenji now seemed a bit more reserved and a little afraid. What is it? The police chief glanced around to make sure no one was listening in on them before speaking. There are signs that multiple quirks were used. Hawks stared right into Kenji's eyes, searching for traces of a joke, but all that greeted him was awkward silence and unwavering certainty. Whoosh! His wings suddenly flared by his sides, sending a gust of wind around them. I'll bring the news to All Might. Kyle's entire body was on fire. He could not tell where he was or what had happened after he fainted. The only thing he knew was pain. His muscles were pulsing, multiple fibers tearing and restructuring themselves. It felt like being stabbed only to be broken and stabbed again. Drool dripped down the side of his mouth as he suppressed a scream that was about to emerge from his throat. His fingers straightened, dark claws ripping through his flesh only to retract, shredding his bedsheet. At times his senses would flare, becoming so sensitive that he could hear even the faintest sounds. The low scratching sound of the hair on his forearm and the flow of blood through his veins even reached as far as his neighbors in the next building as they engaged in nightly activities. Why am I hearing this? He clasped his hands around his ears, but it sounded like drums had been banged right next to him. It was torture. Daisy was jumping from place to place, unsure of what to do. She knew he was evolving, yet his reactions caused her to worry. He had been brought back home by Sino in this state, and since then he seemed to be getting worse. As for Sino, the lad was sleeping through the chaos, his staff resting on the wall by his side. Please don't die. Daisy placed her tiny hand atop his, feeling as his muscles contracted. You've got this. The torment lasted several hours and then finally, Kyle was still. His heart rate had dropped to the point where it was nearly imperceptible and his breathing had calmed. After a few seconds, his eyes snapped open. Kyle let out a tired breath and placed his hand on his face. The first thing he noticed was that he was back in his room and Daisy was sleeping right next to him, her hand placed atop his. Did she stay awake all night? She must have been worried. In the time he was asleep, the world had changed, at least in his eyes. He could now see everything in stunning detail, from the dust mites that lined the table to the tiny scratches at the other end of the wall. Sounds now came with stunning clarity, and his fingers could sense far more detail just from a simple touch. He raised his hand, feeling raw, unhinged power flowing through him. His muscles had gained mass and every single part of him was now more defined. It felt like he could rip a hole in a mountain with a single blow. Before he could evaluate himself further, a blue screen appeared in front of him. Evolution complete. Bloodline stability, 100%. You have obtained a new title, Bloodlord. You have attained a new skill, Grandsire. You have leveled up. A raw power is surging through your veins. All stats have been buffed. Do you wish to see the changes? Name, Kyle. Title, Bloodlord. Class, Ancestral Vampire. Skills, Drain, After Dark, Passive, Blood Manipulation, Bloodlust, Primordial Terror, Geolocation, Aura Punch, Wind Barrier, Muscle Augmentation, Grandsire. Summons, Sino, General Mahamatra, Level 25. Quests, nil. Strength, 140. Agility, 100. Perception, 99. Energy, 88. Defense, 57. Defense against wood, -40. Bloodline stability, 100%. Hunger level, low.
Sires, nil.
Kyle's mouth hung open when he saw his new stats. He knew he had grown stronger. His new physique and senses made that perfectly clear. What he did not expect was that the leap would be so great. His strength had doubled and his other stats had received insane buffs as well. He smiled as he went through everything, taking his time to soak in the feeling. Then finally, he got to the last part of the screen. Sires, it was clearly related to the new skill he had earned, Grandsire, and from its name, Kyle could already guess what type of skill it was. Since becoming a vampire, he had given little thought to if he could create other vampires like himself. But now that the option was right in front of him, he couldn't help but think about the possibilities. With this skill, he could easily build an army of vampires, overturn the city and place himself as the de facto leader. He could also choose to reserve it and build a small group of trustworthy people to assist him with his plans. System, can I get details on Grandsire? If Daisy was awake, then he could have simply asked her since she was like an extension of the system, but she was still asleep. A new transparent screen appeared just by the side of the stat screen.
Blood. Sire.
When drinking blood directly from a living source, the host has the ability to transform them into a vampire. Vampires created this way are called sires and do not bear the ancestral vampire bloodline. Instead, they gain any of the other bloodlines, which are based on their innate makeup. The more sires you gain, the more influence you have over your territory. Everything was just as he expected it to be, all apart from the last part. What do you mean by influence? Influence is how much passive control you have over your surroundings. When your influence is high, you might notice the world slowly shifting to your side. Things become clearer. The wind seems to aid your steps. Basically, you will influence the world around you. So the world will favor me? Isn't that like having high luck stats? Maybe he was wrong, but it didn't matter, though. The skill was already amazing as it was. Anything else was just an added bonus. Kyle stood up from the bed and covered Daisy with his blanket, after which he noticed that his chair, which was normally by his desk, was now by the side of his bed. Sino must have left it there. Kyle's mind briefly went to what happened just after the fight. He had never expected to go unconscious just like that, and the system failed to even warn him. If not for Sino, then maybe he would have been in a cell by now. He made a mental note to entertain his jokes more as a means of thanks. It was a lot considering he would be risking his sanity. He did a few stretches before going into the bathroom to have a steaming hot shower. Kyle got out of the bathroom a few minutes later feeling completely refreshed. His eyes once again took in his new body and he smiled. Although he exercised frequently in his last world, he was never this fit. I wonder how strong I am now. He pulled his fist back and tensed his muscles. Should I use Muscular's quirk? Kyle shook his head. Using it for a practice punch would be unnecessary. He sucked in a deep breath and drove his fist forward, right into open air. He did not use his full strength, nor did he even use the quirks he had at his disposal. And yet, bang! The air vibrated as his hand cut right through it. A surge of wind brought about by the force of the blow slammed into his bench, decimating it and sending splintered wood all around him. Kyle's eyes widened. Damn it, I used too much force. Kyle. Are you all right? It was his sister's voice. Damn it, I didn't even know she was back. I'm fine, it's nothing serious, he shouted back. She was quiet for a few seconds just before she screamed once more. All right then, come down or I'll come up there, dinner is ready. Kyle looked at the table once more before hurrying out of the room. But in his bid to avoid her suspicion, he forgot to grab a shirt. Sumi was in the kitchen downstairs, wearing a shirt with a large bunny design, coupled with gray sweatpants. Her long black hair was tied up in a loose ponytail, allowing a few stray strands to cover her face, and in her hand was a large wooden spoon. What are we having? Kyle asked as he slipped into the chair. Nothing major. Just sukiyaki, rice balls with salmon and miso soup. We will have some delicious mochi for dessert, Sumi said, her attention still on the pot. She placed the plates on the counter and began serving the food. So how was work? Did anything jog your memory? Although she was not looking at him, Kyle shook his head. Nothing at all. The cafe was nice, though. Don't worry about it. Give it time. I'm sure your memories will come back soon, she said while waving her spoon in the air.
Yeah. Kyle replied dryly.
Sumi then grabbed the food and turned to place it on the table, only to pause when she saw him. Her eyes moved down from his muscular arms to his well-built chest and shoulders, then a sly smile appeared on her face.
Heh.
She placed the plates on the table and sat down next to him. When did you start working out? Did you secretly get yourself a girlfriend?
Kyle sighed and picked up his plate. No.
Sumi raised a brow, her smile never leaving her face. Then why were you late? Come to think about it, I didn't even hear you enter, which means you snuck in.
Kyle nearly choked on his food.
I was just busy with work. Sumi did not look convinced. She leaned in a little closer until their faces were just a few inches apart, then she bumped her forehead with his and laughed.
Ouch, hee. Keeping secrets from your sister now, huh? You little rascal.
Sumi ruffled his hair and picked up her own plate of food. Kyle sighed, relieved that she was finally dropping the topic. It's not like I can tell you I spent my night fighting one of the most notorious villains in existence. He picked up his rice ball and bit into it, then sipped a bit of miso soup, his face brightening up as the flavors played with his tongue. Meanwhile, Sumi was watching him from the corner of her eye even as she ate. He said he was at work, but I called Saku earlier and she said they closed quite a while ago, Sumi thought. She stabbed her fork into her fish and stole a glance at him.
What are you hiding, Kyle?
Please, know that events in the coming chapters may not exactly be chronologically correct according to the show, but this is a fanfic after all, so let's go. The next day, I can't believe we are finally going to USJ. I heard they have volcanic mountains.
Volcanic mountains?
What about their sea terrain? The students of Class 1A were chatting amongst themselves, discussing what had occupied their minds from the moment it was announced. The Unseen Simulation Joint Facility. Today was the day they finally began their rescue training in UA's Advanced Simulation Center. What about you, Deku? What part of USJ interests you the most? Someone asked from beside him. Deku, who had been staring at his scarred hands, turned to the person. It was Uraraka, and she was sitting so close to him that their shoulders were touching. Deku scratched his hair and laughed nervously, heat already rising up to his face.
I can't decide.
Everything sounds so great. MMH, I want to try every simulation. Uraraka smiled and stood up, leaning above the chair in front of them. What about you, Bakugo? Steamy as usual, Kaken frowned, his teeth gritted.
Ha!
It doesn't matter where I go, I'll beat down anyone who steps up to me. Uraraka smiled tiredly and plopped back into her seat.
Bakugo can be tiring.
Deku gave her an apologetic look. Kaken had been that way ever since they were kids. Not long after, the bus suddenly jerked, the tires grinding to a halt, after which Aizawa got up from his seat. All right, remember the instructions I gave you previously as well as all our safety measures. If you notice anything weird, report to either me or 13. He lazily watched the group, his eyes settling on Deku for a second longer. Then the bus doors slid open, revealing the magnificent structure outside.
Let's go.
The students rushed past Aizawa like a tide, everyone excited to see USJ outside the confines of the bus. There were a number of oohs and ahs as they looked from one structure to another. Deku smiled as they approached the door. Not too long ago he had been quirkless and on the verge of giving up on his dream. But today, he was in one of the most prestigious schools in the country. He tightened his fists, a nervous smile on his face. Let's do this. When they finally entered USJ, there was a large spaceman waiting for them inside. Welcome to USJ. She screamed, her excitement matching that of the students. 13 cleared her throat before she began speaking. I know you are all itching to begin your simulations, but before we begin, let me say a few things. Some of you might already know, but my quirk is Black Hole. I can suck anything or anyone into it and crush them to dust. They all watched him, giving 13 their complete attention. Rescue Hero 13. Deku mused. Her quirk was a powerful one that had been used to rescue countless people in the past. My quirk can also easily kill. Her words were met with a deafening silence. Many of them had come to this realization a long time ago. Just like villains, they too had the capacity to unleash carnage. The difference between a villain and a hero is what they do with the power they are given. 13 continued. But your powers are not for destruction. Every place you visit, anyone you cross paths with, being a hero means being able to save, the ability to rescue those in dire constraints. She placed his hands on his chest. That is what being a hero is. And my sincere hope for you today is that you leave here with that knowledge. There was a wave of applause as 13 finished her speech. All right, now it is about time we go start. Tzzzzzzzz. An electric buzz suddenly spread through the roof, moving along the wires before fizzling out. What is going? Before the student could complete his sentence, far in the distance a purple haze burst to life, just out of the waterfall. And out of that purple distortion came a Mun. They could not see him clearly at this distance, and yet they could feel it. That Mun was trouble. His skin was dull, nearly gray, and on his body were multiple human arms, holding him like infernal beings pulling him down. Shigaraki looked to where the students were and frowned. All Might, where is the symbol of peace? He asked, his voice sounding scratchy. The darkness around him pulsed and two yellow eyes tore through the haze. The eyes narrowed slightly and then he spoke. There isn't any sign of him in the area. Shigaraki frowned. He was supposed to be here. Was our intel wrong? Kurogiri gave no answer. His eyes were instead locked on the heroes. It doesn't matter. Shigaraki raised a finger, pointing it at the students that were high up on an elevated platform. Why don't we kill those kids? A crazed smile appeared on his face. If we kill them, then All Might will come running. Deku was watching the crowd with a nervous expression. I have a bad feeling about this. Are those guys part of the course, or are they? Stay back. Aizawa yelled. He tightened his scarf around his neck and pulled his goggles down. Meanwhile, the students whispered amongst themselves in shock. How was it possible that villains had entered UA? How come the security systems had malfunctioned? How did they know they would be here? Nothing was making sense. 13. Evacuate the students. I'll hold back the villains myself. Deku's face hardened when he stared at the crowd steadily approaching them. What? He wants to fight them alone. He wanted to stop Aizawa and possibly help him, but before he could, Aizawa jumped down from the platform, racing down upon the villains like a comet. Come with me, let's go. 13 instructed, herding the students toward the back door when, whoosh, darkness exploded right out of the entrance, surrounding the students on all sides. The villain in the darkness stared down at them, the shadows growing even more oppressive. Students of UA, we are the League of Villains, and today we have come to take the symbol of peace. We are here to kill All Might. Both Kaken and Kirishima lunged at the villain, abandoning every single safety precaution they had been told. Sparks appeared in Kaken's fingers, glowing brightly just before he unleashed the explosion. Boom! Hot orange fire soared out of his fingers. The ground in front of him cracked, spewing dust and broken concrete. The dust and smoke mixed up in front of them to form a cloudy haze, making it hard to see what had happened. When the dust settled, the darkness-cloaked Mun was still standing, very much unharmed. TCH. Kaken hissed, smoke streaming out of his fingers. He took his stance, his face locked in a snarl. But before he could launch another attack, they were all covered by a cloud of deep, black, impenetrable darkness.
And that concludes this episode. If you enjoyed it, I'd seriously love it if you guys could leave a like on the video, as it genuinely helps out so much, and it keeps me going, plus it takes only 1 second. That said, have a wonderful day. See you in the next one.